Hello everyone, today I'm going to tell you a story. Its title is Berenice. It was written by Edgar Allan Poe and was published in the year 1835. This story is about Berenice, which is told by Aegeus, her fiance, from the recollections of his horrible past. Aegeus tells us that Berenice and he were cousins. Both of them grew up together in Aegeus' family mansion, but they grew up differently. While Berenice was always full of spirits, graceful, vivacious, and lively, Aegeus, on his part, was always sad and gloomy. As they grew up, Berenice caught some mysterious disease, due to which her health started deteriorating day after day. She was suffering from some sort of epilepsy that would frequently end up in a trance like state, and from which she would recover, in most of the cases, almost abruptly. In the meantime, Aegeus himself caught a disease that he terms as monomania. In this disease, the attention of an afflicted person gets fixed on an object or idea, even of an ordinary status, to such an extent that the person would go on thinking about it for hours and hours, or maybe for a whole day, or in some instances, even for a number of days in continuity. Aegeus shares with us some of the episodes that he credits to his disease. He tells us that he would sometimes lose himself for an entire night in watching the steady flame of a lamp, or he would dream away the whole day over the perfume of a flower, or he would repeat some common word until the sound of the word ceases to convey any meaning to his mind at all. Of his relation with Berenice, Aegeus tells the readers that he had never loved her, even during the brightest days of her unparalleled beauty. Because when he saw Berenice, he would see her not as some living and breathing Berenice, but Berenice of some sort of dream, not as some not as something to admire, but to analyze, not as an object of love, but as a theme of some sort of speculation. Still, probably showing a pity over her falling physical condition, and on account of the fact that even if he had never entertained any such emotion toward Berenice, Berenice had always loved him, and on an unfaithful day, Aegeus proposes her for marriage. Now Aegeus tells the readers that the date of their marriage was approaching, and on a warm afternoon of winters, while he was sitting in the library of his family mansion and was completely engrossed by some random thought, he found Berenice standing before him. Berenice did not say a word, and Aegeus, on his part, even if he wished, could not utter a word himself. He tells us that some strange chilly wave ran through his body, and he remained seated in his chair, motionless and breathless. As today, the Berenice who stood before him had nothing left in her of the Berenice that he grew up with. Then his attention fell upon the Berenice's face, and Aegeus describes her face as something like this. Forehead was high and pale, eyes appeared lusterless and somewhat lifeless and pupilless. Lips had become miserably thin and shrunken, and when they parted to allow a smile of some peculiar nature, her teeth disclosed themselves. Shutting off some door described Aegeus, and as he looked up, he found that Berenice had gone out of the library. But the image of her teeth that he had just seen had never left from his mind. In his mind, he could see those particular teeth more clearly than when he saw them in actuality upon Berenice's face. The teeth, the teeth. He could see them here and there and everywhere. Aegeus tells us that those teeth were all he could think about. Nothing else in the outside world catches his attention anymore. For hours and hours, in his mind's eye, He dwelt in surveying the minute details of his new obsession, those set of 32 teeth. 2 days had passed with Aegeus sitting in his library, still buried in ruminating over those teeth, when in the evening of the second day he heard some voices of loud cry mixed with low moanings and of sorrow and pain. Aegeus immediately stood up from his chair and threw open the library door and found outside a servant, all in tears. Aegeus was told that Berenice had an epilepsy attack and was no more, and a grave had been prepared for the burial. Aegeus further tells us that it was around midnight of the day Berenice had died and was buried. He found himself sitting in his library. It seemed to him as if he had just awakened from some kind of dream. Everything was cloudy in his mind. No matter how hard he attempts at deciphering his confusion, he just could not do it. Some unclear memory of something extremely horrible was troubling him excessively. Shrill and piercing shriek of a female seemed to be ringing in his ears. He felt that something had been done by him, but what it was, he just could not remember. Beside Aegeus on the table lay a small box. It belonged to the family physician, although Aegeus had several times seen that small box around. Today, the box lying on the table troubled him immensely. Now his glance fell upon the pages of a book. The words written on the pages left the blood in his veins stopped flowing, erected the hairs on his head. They were the words of a poet, and were as such. My companions told me I might find some little reduction in my misery in visiting the grave of my beloved. Then Aegeus heard a light tap at the library door, and entered in a servant, pale in complexion, terrified to the innermost core, shaking wildly. The servant spoke of a wild cry outside the mansion, and a search that followed in the direction of the sound. Then his voice grew thinner, and he whispered about a violated grave, of a disfigured body, yet still breathing, horribly shaking, still alive. Then the servant pointed to Aegeus' clothes. They were all covered in mud, and had large spots of blood upon them. Now the servant took Aegeus by the hand, and it was indented with impressions of human nails. Then he pointed towards something on the wall. Aegeus looked at it for a while. It was a spade, a tail, a tool to dig out the mud. In horror, as Aegeus turned back, he hit the table, and the box that lay upon the table fell upon the floor and broke into pieces, and the contents of the box scattered upon the floor. They were some instruments of dental surgery, and 32 small, white, and ivory looking substances.